On behalf of the Warehouse Arts District Association, I would like to thank everyone for joining us tonight. We have WADA Board member and mosaic artist Teresa Sullivan. My name is Susan Antoinette, and I am a WADA Board member and the Education Committee Chair with Anna Broshears, who's also on our call tonight, as my mighty co-chair. And on behalf of WADA and our entire Education Committee, we are happy to bring you tonight's program as one of our member benefits. I would like to introduce you to Teresa Sullivan. Teresa is a military brat and by age 10 has lived in Japan, Morocco, England, and traveled in Spain, France, and Germany. She has been an avid world traveler ever since. Teresa spent most of her professional career heading a consulting firm for nonprofits and professional associations in a direct marketing fundraiser and membership acquisition capacity. She lived in Washington, D.C. area for more than 30 years. And actually we lived a few blocks apart.
I didn't know it.
And didn't know it for a few months overlap. Teresa began her artist endeavor in 1983 when she learned how to make stained glass windows. In 1999, she traveled to Tunisia, where she first saw ancient mosaics both in the museums and throughout the countryside, and was astounded that the works maintained their vibrancy through millennia. In 1999, Teresa spent 3 weeks in Israel and Jordan, and upon returning home, she started making mosaics out of stained glass material. In 2002, she traveled to Italy, where she learned the ancient art of mosaic making in Ravenna, using ancient materials while learning classic mosaic methods using ancient tools. Since then, she has continued her studies with world-renowned masters in mosaics in Italy, Mexico, and the United States. Teresa and her husband moved to St. Pete in 2002. She immediately volunteered to become the first treasurer of WADA. She is a founding board member and currently serves as the chair of marketing and fundraising committees, and is the webmaster and co-editor of the WADA Weekly Digest. So we are very blessed to have Teresa as part of WADA. She does a tremendous amount of work for us. All right, so I'd like to get us started and present Teresa Sullivan. So I'm going to now share I'll give you have screen sharing capabilities. So I'm going to turn my volume off, and you'll need to turn your volume up. This is where everyone has to bear with me. Okay, so Teresa, go ahead and speak and let's see if we can hear you.
I'm just turned my sound on.
There you go. So I'm going to mute my computer. Okay, we should not have feedback. You should be good there. And if you do it like that, screen-wise, everyone will see everything, but that's fine. That's fine. Do it. You're good.
Okay, are we okay, everybody? Can you hear me?
Yep, I see some thumbs up.
Okay, excellent, excellent. Well, thank you so much for joining me. And Susan, I really appreciate this. As some of you know, I've been very passionate about mosaics for years and years and years. And I hope you come to understand why I'm so passionate about it. So this presentation is going to be in 2 parts. I'm going to do a slide presentation where I talk about briefly about the history of mosaics, to explain some of the terminology, because it's like every other thing, it's got its own language, to show you some methods of how mosaics are actually made. We then are going to segue into a demo, a live demo. I'll show you some of the materials that are available. I'll show you how I actually cut materials, and then walk you through a piece that I recently completed. So, of course, the first question is, what is a mosaic? They've been around for a very long time, but throughout the world, they're pretty much made in a very, very similar way, especially the ancient mosaics. It's simply a pattern made of small pieces of material. When they first started out, they were always cubes, and then over time, things have gone to different types. So the first mosaics were discovered and in a place called Uruk in Mesopotamia, which is now Iraq. And they date to 5,000 years. They were pretty simple. They were cones that were pushed narrow end into a material, cement-like material, and then solidified. They're not in very good shape, as you might imagine, a 5,000-year-old art form. But those were the very first ones that have been discovered. The Romans, it's amazing still how vibrant the Roman mosaics are. They can be found anywhere that the Romans were, in Britain, in Italy, in North Africa. They are absolutely everywhere. Now, the way the Romans made the mosaics is one of the reasons why there's been some discussion of, is this really an art form? Because there were upwards to 5 to 6 groups of people that were involved. You had the person who made the concept. You then had the person who drew a life-size cartoon. You then had the people who cut the stone, and then you then had the people who inserted the stone. And so it was very much of a collaborative project, not a one person doing it from start to finish. I chuckle. Some of the best preserved Roman mosaics are actually in Herculaneum and in Pompeii. They were both obviously buried during the volcano in 79 AD. And so they were in mud, especially in Herculaneum. They were encased in mud. And so the brilliance and the spectacular mosaics are really quite well preserved. And if you ever have an opportunity, I strongly recommend going there. I had to chuckle. When I was at Masada in Israel 20 some odd years ago, it's completely exposed to the elements. And I saw some mosaics, and I thought, gee, I wonder if I throw some water on there, if it would make them look a little bit brighter, which I did. I was promptly scolded by somebody else, saying that I was going to ruin them because I put water on them, though they, of course, had been subject to the elements for more than 2,000 years. So I was kind of chuckled about that. Now, the Greeks really kind of perfected pebble mosaics, and they are some of the most spectacular. I've always marveled that you could actually find that many pebbles of exactly the same size that you could then make into a mosaic. And they are found, actually, there are quite a few in Turkey. And so much like the Romans, wherever the Greeks went, they also built mosaics. The real heyday of mosaics was during the Byzantine era, which was almost a millennia long. They really had perfected the ability of making glass. The smalty that I'm going to show you later was perfected during the Byzantine time. And they started to make mosaics that were not just of stone, but of glass. Because the Byzantium era was very prominent in the early days of Christianity, there are a staggering amount of mosaics that are religious and really try to appeal to people's spirituality. The churches that still exist today, I'm speaking specifically about Ravenna, which is about 2 hours south of Venice, almost on the coast. The churches are brick on the outside. They look very plain. And then you walk into these churches and there are these magnificent mosaics that go up 30, 40 feet up the walls and around the domes. So they're really quite remarkable. And then, of course, Constantinople, which is today, I am blanking on what kind of, Istanbul, sorry, is Istanbul, the Hagia Sophia, which was originally started out as a Christian church, is really quite one of the most beautiful groups of mosaics I think I've ever seen. A lot of people are not aware that the Islamic religion embraced mosaics. As you may know, Islam does not permit human figures. And so the artist of the time really created rather remarkable mosaics of calligraphy, and then of simply beautiful abstracts. The photo that's in the middle is actually in Cordoba, and it is at the Alhambra. The Alhambra is really rather incredible. So the Islamists basically focus on geometrical and abstract. Now, on the other side of the ocean, the pre-Columbian Americans were also making mosaics. And it always struck me as amazing that neither of the worlds had interacted, yet the way the mosaics look and are made is very, very similar. Then we get to the Vaticans. Now, the Vatican mosaics are where there's some real controversy in the mosaic world. The Vatican started to be concerned about their paintings that were starting to deteriorate just from age and exposure to the elements. And so they turned to mosaics to preserve artwork, to make eternal pictures. The picture over on the left is what is called phylloty. And what it is are strands of glass that have been pulled to be very, very thin. So, okay, and then the picture on the right, you can actually see the little bitty pieces of glass, which when you look at the picture in the middle gets completely lost. So it does look like a painting. And the controversy in the mosaic world is that part of the appeal of mosaic is the andamento, the flow, which we'll go into a little bit later, and the fact that you can distinguish a row from a row and not that all the color blends in. Today, there are a couple schools at the Vatican where micro mosaics are used, are made, and these things are amazing. Some of them may be like 5 inches by 5 inches and have 10,000 pieces of glass, and each strand of that glass is smaller than a pin, not the pin head, the pin. So it's still rather remarkable. So when you get into the 20th century, there are a couple early 20th century people who really use mosaics very effectively. The first one is Antonin Gaudi in Barcelona. And there are many, many buildings and parks that were built by Gaudi. The most famous is the Sagrada Familia, which is still actually a work in progress. My husband John and I went to the Sagrada Familia in 1985, and nothing was enclosed. The towers were not even finished. And we recently went there about 3 years ago, and to have seen the amazing progress that's been made there is just crazy. His 100th anniversary of his death is in 2026. And they are working like crazy to try to get it finished so that they can actually celebrate. The other person, and some people are unfamiliar with this, is that Marc Chagall actually did quite a bit of work in mosaic, which really surprised me until I went to Chicago, and actually there are a number of his pieces are there. So it's very interesting to see, especially somebody like a Chagall, who's a major medium, were not mosaics, to have been so successful and to have created some rather remarkable mosaics. I'm now going to go into a little bit in talking about mosaics in the modern era. What's really changed is that people have sort of broken the barrier where they don't feel compelled to do it the way it used to be done by the Greeks and the Romans. You'll see a lot of different materials. You'll see a lot of abstract, 2D plus 3D work. And so just in the 20 years that I've been involved in mosaics, I've been staggered by people keeping pushing the limit on what a mosaic can actually be. Now, this picture is actually the tomb of Rudolf Nureyev. It's in Paris, and it is made of 100% mosaic to look like a killam. He was from part of the Caucasus, and whenever he traveled, he always had a killam rug with him that he would often drape over his shoulder as a reminder of what home was. And so when he died, it was commissioned for his tomb to actually have a rug. The sad news is that unfortunately people keep coming and picking the little gold off, so it's constantly being repaired. The picture on the left is done by a mosaic artist by the name of Jane Muir. She is British. She is still alive, though she's no longer doing mosaic. She's in her 90s. She was one of the first women mosaicists to really start having commissions. And these others are just showing you different methods, different materials. So now what we're going to do is we're going to start talking about some of the terminology. The term tessera basically means a dice, a die. The material, and I call it the stuff that you stick. So it's the material that you use. You have natural materials, you have man-made materials, you have found objects. Really, the only thing that is not appropriate for materials are things that are degradable. So typically wood is not used. Mosaics are typically built to last. I mean, we know we've got mosaics that are 5,000 years old, and the Roman mosaics are 2,000 to 3,000 years old. And so the psychology or the thinking behind mosaics is to make things sustainable. And so biodegradable materials are usually not used unless that's part of an artistic statement. The cutting of the stuff, how you make the stuff smaller. The classic material is what's called a hammer and hardy. I will be doing a demonstration on that with those tools. Regular nippers and a wet saw. There are multiple types of nippers, and I'll show you a little bit about that. The methodology, how do you get this? How do you stick the stuff? There are many directions, and I'm going to walk through several of the different methodologies of how you make a mosaic or how you stick the stuff. And what do you stick it onto? That's called the substrate. It can be glass, it can be a floor, it can be wall, it can be a 3D object. It can be a lot of different things. So I think you're starting to hear that there are a lot of ways that you can make mosaic. It's not just one way anymore. Adhesives, how do you get the stuff to stick on the substrate? Probably the material that's used the most, especially for outdoor mosaics, is thin set, which is what you buy at Home Depot or Lowe's. There are a couple really well-known manufacturers of it. You can also use silicone, which will also work outside. And then there's a variety of different white glues. If you're going to keep the piece inside, you can use different glues. Now, there's a term that's called the interstices, and that is the line, the space between the stuff when you lay it. And sometimes the space can be as important as the actual tessera. And I'll show you some examples of how that works. And then we'll talk a little bit about grout. Now, a lot of people think tile, they think grout, and that you always have to grout. Well, you don't. You can, you really need to use grout when there is if it's the tile is for functional, like a floor. I can't imagine putting a floor down without putting grout, because you would be forever cleaning garbage out of the cracks. Same thing with a kitchen backsplash. But when it gets into something that you're going to hang on the wall, there really is no need for grout. And it's very interesting to listen to some of the message boards with mosaic people. There are some people that would never, ever, ever consider doing a piece without grout. And myself and many of the others who have been classically trained hardly ever use it unless, again, it's going to be functional. All right, different methods. The direct method, that's the easy one. You've got your substrate. Let's say it's just a piece of board. And you're going to glue stuff right onto it. You can use thin set, you can use silicone, you can use anything, but it's just, there's nothing fancy. You may have a pattern, you may adhere to the pattern, but you're just sticking stuff straight onto the subset. Try to say that 3 times. The double direct method is you're actually making it on a mesh. And the reason you would do this is if you were making a big piece that you had to transport. For instance, if I'm making a 3 feet by 20 foot backsplash, I'm probably not going to want to do that direct, leaning over the kitchen counter. So what I can do is make it on mesh. So the way I work this is if I put the pattern down, I then put a piece of plastic that is not going to adhere. I then put the mesh down, and then I start gluing the material down onto the mesh. That piece in between, that plastic piece in between, allows me that when I'm done, I can pick that piece up. I can cut it up into sections so that I can do it a little bit at a time. But it allows for working on bigger pieces and working in the comfort of the studio as opposed to where you're actually making it. Now, the indirect method is particularly used for when you're trying to make a surface that is very smooth, a floor, a tabletop. So this particular picture is showing craft brown paper. The pattern is drawn on the paper, and then the material is glued with a temporary glue, one that's water soluble. Because what's going to happen eventually is this is going to be flipped over into a bed of thin set and tamped to be even. Once that thin set dries, then the paper is going to be wetted, and then you can pull the whole thing off. And so that you've got the surface there. And again, with the table, you would probably grout it. Now, the double indirect method is kind of the classic Byzantine. When I took my first class in Ravenna, this is how we did it. You created a bed of lime. I've done it recently using a soft clay. You trace your pattern onto it, and then you are able to cut the pieces to exactly fit the pattern. You then put a layer of gauze over that and use a water-soluble adhesive. Let that dry. Then you get all the clay off. All the clay or all the lime off, and then you put that into a bed of thin set. It's a 17-step process. I groan every time I take on a project where I'm doing it, but I'm invariably really happy with it when I've done it. Okay, so those are 4 different techniques. There are a bunch of other techniques that we could go into, but these are probably the 4 most used ones. So the lingo. I was very pleased when I heard that the word mosaic is actually the Greek word for muse. And so I've always kind of tried to link my muse to that. The tessera, which is a Latin word, the plurus tesserae, is the actual cube of material. So even if it's not a cube, we do tend to talk about it as the tessera because that's the material. The andamento, which is a word I'm introducing, is the flow. So the pattern of the pieces that are next to each other, how that flows together. And I'm going to go into an example of different kinds of andamento. And then, of course, as I said earlier, the space between the tessera is the interstices. So andamento is the flow of how the pieces are laid together. So opus tessellatum, oops. Backing up here, is the background here, where the pieces are fundamentally the same size. They're either horizontal, rows of either horizontal or vertical. And you can see that when you've got the background being static, that it makes the image actually jump. Now, opus palladianum, I keep tripping over that, is also called crazy paving. It's just irregular shaped pieces that are kind of put together. Typically, this is where you would use a ground. And I'd also like to point out that the wall is an opus tessellata. So you've got the mixture of both. Opus vermiculatum, I don't know if you can see, but there's a border around the cat that goes against, that is different from the background. And what that actually does is make the image jump out at you a little bit more. Okay, so that kind of closes the presentation. I'm going to stop the share of my screen, and I'm going to take my sound down so that Susan can take over from here.
Okay, so the tools of the trade. The stuff. So the materials that we're using to make mosaics. I'm going to start off with my very personal favorite, which is smalty. Smalty is made in Mexico and in Italy. They're typically made in a almost round shape. They're pure color. And the formulas for the colors are secret. Nobody will ever tell you how these colors are put together. So I can buy it as a whole. I can also buy a piece of it. And as you can see here, the color goes all the way through. Beautiful pieces. Or I can buy it in smaller chunks. And I've actually nibbled away at this one a little bit. Again, the color goes all the way through. You've got a little bit of a variation of the color here on the top. And then on this piece, you've got quite a bit of variation.
Teresa, do you have to buy these in Italy, or can you get them in a Dick Blick?
No, I cannot get them at Blick, but there are several distributors here in the United States, and I'm going to show you sort of the range of colors in a little bit. But no, I can buy them from distributors here. So I'll also use stone. Again, I can buy I can just pick up, I can harvest stone. I can sometimes buy stone in small chunks. I've often bought tile that I kind of liked and just peel it off and then cut it. Peeling off is sometimes not so easy. So I can peel it and then cut it. So I'm gonna, I can use ceramics. These are pieces of ceramics I've actually made in a studio. Shells, of course, can be used. Natural materials. This is called kyanite. I did a piece. This is a spectacular blue. And I have used this for sky in a mosaic piece. Then we've got some luscious materials over here. This is called Van Gogh glass. It's quite lovely and very iridescent. It's got almost a rubberized back. And this is the good stuff. This is the gold smalty. And the way this is made is a piece of glass. The blue glass is at the bottom. There's a thin piece of gold leaf. And then there's another piece of glass on top of that. This is very precious stuff. There's a Buddha that is in Bangkok, Thailand, that is made exclusively of this. And the Buddha is like 30 to 40 feet tall. So, and all of this particular gold stuff comes from a company called the Orsoni Company in Venice. Here's a bigger piece of the same thing.
And like how much?
Again, sometimes
How much would that piece cost?
That's $12.
12?
Yep. And I will get waste because when I'm cutting through the gold leaf, sometimes this top layer of glass fractures, which means the gold is ultimately going to deteriorate. So, and I will get, like I said, there'll be waste out of there. I can use ceramics. There's a way of making ceramics, using ceramics. It's called pique assiette, which actually means broken plates or broken dishes. A lot of people who use that will typically use china that's literally been broken up, that's got a pattern, and then just use it. This is a material, Litovie. It is French. Big old chunk of material. This is a combination of glass and porcelain, and it is the toughest thing I have ever cut in my life. And I, of course, used this piece for my recent piece that I did for the You Good show. Of course, I would pick the hardest material to cut with. This is what it looks like cut up. The waste is staggering because it does not cut easily, but I loved it so much because of the matte finish. So you were asking about the different places where I can buy it. Here's kind of what it looks like. I mean, there are, and Susan's going to pan up here. I'm going to show her some other. So over here, this is the gold mosaic glass, the gold smalty. And as you can see, it comes in a lot of different colors, really quite beautiful colors. And I am so enamored of this stuff, but I kind of have to set a budget for myself. Next to it is the gold smalty, and it comes in many, many colors, as you can see here. And this is about the size that I can get it pre-cut. And then the last three ones are stone.
Did you make those boards for yourself or just suppliers give them to you?
No, I bought them from the suppliers. I think a set of them are like $25. The gold one I actually got, I was given because I went to Italy and took a 2-week course at the Arsoni factory, and they included a sample board as part of their cost of the class. So I gratefully accepted that. So now we know the materials. Oh, and one other, stained glass. I used stained glass. I did a logo that is above the gate at the Warehouse Arts District Association. It goes onto the Pinellas Trail. And I used stained glass because I had to cut letters, and cutting stained glass in straight lines is much easier than cutting most of the other stuff. All right. Now, here's another material that I use, and I mentioned it in the context of the Roman or the Vatican mosaics, and that's Filati. Filati are these little tiny threads of glass that's been pulled. So it's heated in a crucible, little crucible, to complete melting point, and then it is pulled apart into these lines. And so typically, I'm not going to lay the mosaic flat like this. I'm going to cut a little bitty piece like that, and I'm going to use that in mosaics. And that's what the Vatican is doing with their mosaics. I love working in micro mosaics. It's very hard for people who have really good vision because the eye string is remarkable, but I have 2400 vision, so it works just fine for me. Okay, cutting materials or cutters. So I have wheeled nippers, 2 different kinds. This you can buy in Lowe's or Home Depot. This is from a company that is called Starrett. They make very high quality nippers. And so I nip. pretty straightforward. I can get smaller and smaller. I can do long. So typically what I would do, if I know I'm going to need one particular material, I will cut a whole bunch up ahead of time. And then start putting them down, because to cut and glue and cut and glue and cut and glue, if you're using thin set, the thin set dries out, and the glue is it's just more efficient to do cutting first. Now these are some of my favorite material, favorite cutters. This is a starrett. I take it back. This is a starrett. This stuff is fabulous for cutting porcelain. I did a piece with porcelain, the whole thing of porcelain, and these were the only nippers I had at the time. And they're much harder to cut. With these two guys, big and small, go through this stuff like butter. Now, you are looking at $175. So now I do also want to introduce probably one of the most important aspects of a studio, which is Band-Aids, because we do cut ourselves. And so I have a whole drawer over here in my studio. And to be honest with you, as far as I'm concerned, it's not a piece of art if I've not bled on it. But it's a little bit of me in every piece of mosaic. Okay, so Susan's going to come around and we're going to look at two cutting mechanisms. And I mentioned one of these in the talk, and this is the hammer and party. Hammer, party, embedded in a piece of wood to absorb the shock. Because, as you know, glass will shatter. I can cut small teeth on this without it shattering. So what I'm doing here is I'm trying to cut the glass without getting these two things connected. So I'm not hammering. I'm not breaking my wrist. I keep my wrist straight. And again, I can get really tiny with this. And I can cut stone. No, this is a very soft stone. I've actually found that this tool is easier for me to use than to work with the nippers for a long period of time. This is so easy on the body. The back is straight. Then I put my knees sort of grasping the tree top, and I can rest my hand here while I'm cutting.
This looks dangerous, Teresa.
It's not. I have never cut myself doing this, which is just crazy.
Until now. No, just now that you said that.
But at least I've got the Band-Aids.
That's true. You are right.
I'm starting to see that one thing every single artist has in common is a love of supplies. We were probably all the kids that liked getting school supplies every year.
Absolutely. I love an office supply store. I mean, that's like heaven. This tool though has been around since Byzantine time. They actually have some bas-relief images that show these tools being used. I learned this when I took my first class in Italy in 2002. takes a little getting used to, but it's, you look at some people who do this day in and day out, they're still using the same hammer and hardy for 60 years. So this is not exactly a tool that goes away. Okay, so my last machine is my Italian chopping machine. I was asked to work on a column at the Warehouse Arts District a couple years ago. Well, actually 4 years ago now, and needed to cut 50 square feet of mosaics, ceramic tile to build a mosaic. So what I did is invited people to come and volunteer and help work on it together. And so I had somebody would just be sitting here chopping pieces up. This tool is not in every mosaic workshop, but I like it because it allows me to do some serious chunking very easily. So you got that okay, Susan? So if I've got production work to do, this is a great tool. And this was the only tool that I could use that would cut this Litovi stuff. And this is going to be, I don't know where this is going to go, but we'll see if I can cut it. That's not too bad, but it shatters. I typically wear, I do wear glasses, but even if I'm wearing contact lenses, I will wear glasses because I create a lot of shrapnel. I have stuff flying across the room. And so I try to be very mindful. So I use spatulas, I use dental tools. This is great if I've got too much thin set, I can clean things out. I get these from my dentist. And my friend of all friends, tweezers, because I typically tend to work pretty small. And this allows me to be very, very accurate. So here are a couple examples of some work. This is in progress. This is made of stained glass. Little bitty, tiny, tiny pieces of hair here. This is a piece that uses a lot of different materials. This is actually mica that's sitting on its end. This is raku pottery. This is the kyanite that I mentioned earlier. Obviously stone, a little bit of ceramic. So a little bit of everything.
Did you draw that whole design out before you started?
No, this was a completely intuitive piece.
Yeah.
I took a class from this remarkable Israeli woman by the name of Alana Safir, who started making mosaics at the age of 48. She was from Poland and had immigrated to Israel and had been an artist and then began making mosaics. And she was a great believer in what she called spontaneous mosaics. Is sometimes because we're dealing with adhesives that are not very forgiving, if you put some thin set down and come back the next morning and you don't like it, you're chiseling. And so a lot of mosaicists tend to be very structured and planned. And she was a big advocate for just go play, just go do stuff and live with it and learn from it. I did also meant to show you this. This is my working on a micro mosaic. You can see from my fingernail that this is pretty small.
Oh my God, I love that.
So that's actually going to be something I'm going to start doing more, is making jewelry. It's very enjoyable to work with.
I love that gold.
So I know. Well, I'll tell you, the gold's addictive. It's addictive. So I thought I would spend a little bit of time talking about the process I go through. And I was recently selected to be, Susan's reminding me of one other thing. Okay, so this is the candy part. I have row upon row upon row of materials.
Look at this toy store.
Wow.
Some of the stuff I won't ever be able to use, like this is slag glass, which is glass that comes out of a kiln. This fractures too much, but I just like it, so I have it in my studio.
Show your red.
This is called Millefiori, which means 1,000 flowers. It is typically Italian. Many different colors and options for that. Like here's another type. Little bitty guys. So even though my husband thinks I have all the material I could ever use, it never fails that when I start a new project, I do have to go off and buy some more new stuff. And so here's some more small tea, bits and pieces of small tea. So I thought I would walk through how I go about creating. I was fortunate to be selected to create a piece for the You Good program or show that it actually is still in the Arts Exchange gallery. And so the whole concept of the You Good was talk about mental health for children, for the homeless, for seniors, for any different context. And so I chose to start with a picture that I had taken of my husband's and my hand. And so I don't know if you can see here. I can bring it off the way. So what I did is I took a picture of our hands. I then printed it out on 11 by 17 in a black and white, and I started drawing all of my material.
Oh my God.
And you can see like this, when I talk about andamento, that's kind of what we're talking about is the flow of the pieces. You can see there. And I decided that, we each had a ring on. And I decided that I wanted to have something that was going to be unifying. And so I decided to draw a circle behind it. So once I had done this, I took it to FedEx and had them blow it up double, because I knew I didn't want to do a piece that was this size, because I would be dealing with really, really tiny pieces. And so I wanted to do something that was much bigger. And so I blew it up. And then this is this substrate. This is what I made it on. It's called Carry Board. It's available at Floor & Decor, which is where I got this. And what I liked about it, it has a grid, so you can be very exact. It's a foam core, so it's very lightweight. I mean, because mosaics themselves are very heavy with all of the material. And so if you can make the substrate, the backing lighter, it's going to be much easier. And so I chose this. So I then made a decision of, well, do I want to do the image on a rectangle piece and put this here, or do I want to just cut it out? And I opted to cut it out because I thought it was more powerful. So that's what happened. So like here's the back. You can faintly see the grid behind it. And so what I did was I drew the pattern on the carry board, and then started cutting. And so again, I would cut up a number of pieces, I wanted to mix the colors. I had like 4 or 5 different blues that I could use. So I wanted to mix the colors. So I would cut them up and then I would start doing my ondimento. I chose not to do anything in the background because I didn't want anything to compete with the hand. So this is actually tinted thin set. This is blue tinted thin set. And I use blue thin set. And as you can see, there's no grout. There's just space. There's the interstices between the spaces. And the gold is obviously the gold I showed you before. The fingernails, I went through 4 different decisions on fingernails. That actually ends up being Filati. I wanted it to look relatively fine. So that's kind of the process. This piece, I kind of tracked my time on it, and it's about 120 hours. The one piece that I did, that's a monarch butterfly, I used that double direct piece, double direct method that I mentioned that had 17 steps. That piece actually took 160 hours. So it can be a fast way of making art, and it can be a very slow and deliberate way of making art. So that's kind of my presentation. I think we can probably go into Q&A, questions and answers.
Okay, if everyone can just bear with me for a minute while I try not to make you as nauseated as I probably already have.
Should I get back on my computer too soon?
You're
Or I'll just say
okay. Okay. All right. Thank you again, Teresa. We are so grateful for your time tonight. And let me change my screen over. Okay. All right. There we go. Okay.
Success.
I know. I apologize. I hope I didn't make anybody sick because with the moving around. It's definitely not my forte, but we thought it would be a good idea, and I think it turned out okay. So I don't see any questions, and Nancy, I appreciate you just asking questions when you had them. If anyone has any questions, please go ahead and unmute yourself and ask away.
I just want to say, Teresa, that was incredibly interesting.
Oh, yeah. And I have a lot of questions, but thank you, Nancy, for asking all of them.
So I guess I should have done it in the chat or something. I don't know.
No,
Fine.
no.
Yeah, worked out fine. Yes, thank you. Okay, so Diane, did you have a question?
Yes, I'd like to know how you finish the edges of that one with the 2 hands.
I basically used my thumb and pushed thin set into it.
Okay.
Sometimes I will use there's a mesh that we use. It's a alkaline resistant mesh because you do have to worry about any kind of mesh with thin set because it's corrosive. And so sometimes I will wrap the edge with this alkaline resistant mesh, staple it, and then cover it with thin set.
Okay.
Good question, though.
Yeah. Anyone else have any questions?
I love the tiny, tiny little ones.
Nancy, that's not a question. Just teasing.
I like the phrase that you bleed on everything.
Oh, of course.
Right? Leaves a little bit of herself in every
Absolutely.
piece she does.
Right.
I thought it was a question, Susan. I thought the question was, what is Nancy Cohen like?
That's right. It's always that question. Oh, just teasing. All right. Anyone?
I really enjoyed this. I
Oh,
really
thank you.
did.
Good, good.
Thank you. I think you can tell I'm pretty passionate about mosaics.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
I'm really hoping to, once COVID's over, to be able to start teaching, because I need to share the joy.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I'd
Yeah.
sign up.
Good. All right. Well, I'd like to give another sincere thank you to Teresa.
Thank you.
And we'll be sharing this recording of tonight's event on our WADA website. And we tried to do the closed captioning, so I'm really hoping that that shows up on our recording. Please watch for our upcoming events on our WADA Weekly Digest and on our website and the Member Network Facebook page, as well as our WADA Facebook page. In May, our next class, our next education event is May 26th at 6 p.m. And we have Eckerd College art instructor, Rhea Nurmi. And Rhea will be sharing her experience as an international muralist for healing. Her murals are designed and created to provide a liberating experience for patients, visitors, and staff in the clinical environment of hospitals and other medical facilities.
Did you say a muralist or a yodelist?
A muralist.
Oh, okay.
Thank you for the question. Just teasing. Yes. So we invite you to also to our second Saturday events, of course, each month. Next month is May 8th. It will be your last chance to see the You Good show that's up in the Telly Levine Gallery. And we also will have the marketplace going on in the Arts Exchange Plaza. We have lots of new artists in the Warehouse Arts District, so please come visit. And last but not least,
You are a great hostess.
oh, thank you. I appreciate that. So last but not least, if you've enjoyed tonight's event, please consider a donation and are becoming a WADA member if you're not already. Take advantage of all of our member benefits that we have. And I did put in the chat some links to those opportunities, the website and the donation link. So that's all we have tonight. So I thank you for coming and asking good questions. And thank you to Teresa. It was a wonderful evening. All right. Okay, guys. Have a wonderful evening. Thank you very much. Take care.
Thank you, Teresa. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.